the bell tolled its death-like strains, faint as the far-off fatherland, steady as the starlight, and sweet as the scent of the blooming woodbine. The hour of departure is sure and settled, the loss is sharply felt, the gain completed, and vigorous attempts to attain both are oftentimes multiplying on the exertions of the benefited. During all these years of revolution, the wheel of action rounded its roads of reveling, riot, and separation. Shandon Cottage, the little house of Oscar Otwell, where he took up residence when first a visitor to the land of laudable ingenuity, was a pretty structure, and would doubtless have proved a little palace of peace to two such lovers, had the means been forthcoming to keep the glare of poverty within its bed of stillness, and prohibit its visitation where least desired. Oscar, who during his English career never was possessor of aught but a slight pittance derived from the sources of his mental labours, and who courted the vain idea on being made the recipient of £1,000 which he pocketed under false pretences by the underhand sale of Audley Hall, that he was a man of wealth for life, and when safely settled in his trim little cottage, squandered his trifle in a very short time, leaving himself and wife on the mercy of strangers' sympathy, which more or less presents an icy aspect to the eye of the needy. Marjorie Mason, who just spent 12 months under Oscar's roof, was fortunate in securing a husband whose calling kept her during her short lifetime aloof from the imaginative pinches of the uncertain future. It was only when Oscar was forced to evade starvation that he deemed it imperative to accept an appointment in a public school at the yearly income of $1,000, an office he retained until compelled to resign through courting too great love for the all-powerful monster of mangled might, intemperance. After a number of years, the partaker of maddened love was the imparter of maddened might. With beastly force did Oscar Otwell enter Shandon Cottage on the night of his open dismissal from Waketown Public School, and arousing from sleep his wife, with monster oaths inflicted upon her strokes of abuse, which time could never efface.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Ah, it was now the actions of youthful frivolity stood before her mountain high and baffled her sickly retort. It was now she pored over her journal of events, which seemed a burthen unbearable for such a fragile frame, and begged the credit side to be forever closed to her view, whilst she prayed that the debit be left open until she would enter therein all her past debts to him whom she deceived, deluded, denounced, and despised. Next morning mended matters little for Oscar Otwell's wife. Still raging with drunken horror, he lavished upon her torrents of insinuations, which she found impossible to overlook, and which forced her to take refuge in the house of the Reverend Bertram Edgar, nearby. This man of true piety, at whose church she had occasionally worshipped, extended the refuge she presently implored, and proved instrumental in securing for her the position of governess in a nobleman's family some miles distant. Disposing of all the household effects, Oscar pocketed their dainty worth and left Shandon Cottage in earnest pursuit of his wife, intending to again return to their native country in England. His various inquiries regarding her whereabouts proved vain as the vanishing shadow of Venus, and finally, when completely overcome with sober thoughts of his riotous conduct towards the loving and faithful object of his choice, who had risked so much for him, he cursed his very existence. A few weeks found him in utter destitution, without either house or chattels to illegally dispose of in case of emergency, and line his pockets of pauperism with coin of dishonest stamp and flashing forgery. Unsuccessful in his worthless attempts to further manifest a standing in the literary world, and being driven almost crazy in his eager efforts to ascertain whither his wife had bent her footsteps, he, in a moment of madness, resolved to resign himself to that ever-anxious defender of satanic rights, who prowls about in ambush until safely securing his prey with the crooked claws of callous craft. walking along in the moonlight in the direction of Afton Lake, which sometimes offers its deep waters too freely to victims of sin and suffering, Oscar Otwell resolved to bathe his body of perilous adventure in its darkened waters of deepest death, never more to face the troubles and trials of weak man and share them with weaker woman. Never again to approach the wife of his bosom with language of lowest type, or lift to her the hand which he so often had sworn should extend her the aid she now must seek. Arriving at the water's edge, Oscar Otwell divested himself of his scanty attire, and in another moment was struggling in the freezing element which soon should shroud his future with robe of blackest doubt. Dunraven Hall was situated only a mile from Afton Lake, and was inhabited by the Honourable Eric Eustace, a nobleman of unbounded wealth, whose extension of charity was both wide and varied. It was in this family that Mrs. Otwell was fortunate enough in securing the position before referred to, through the instrumentality of her spiritual adviser. On the night that Oscar Otwell resigned his worldly career, there beat one heart in Dunraven Hall with wild emotion. Mrs. Otwell, retiring to bed as usual, found sleep had altogether fled, and, rising from her springy structure of restlessness, dressed herself and paced the bedroom floor, enveloped in dread. She was convinced something was about to happen, and struggling in her great efforts to baffle the fear that haunted her night and day lately, she resolved so soon as daybreak peeped its cheerful face through her window to take a walk along the road in order to cast her fears upon the highway of forgetfulness. Wrapping herself in her warmest cloak, she soon was found walking rapidly along in silence on the road that swept round Afton Lake. She had not gone far when people were seen to mount the fence that conducted them to the nearest point of its water-y expanse, which lay about 50 perches from the main road. Courting her curiosity with nervous fear, she walked along, wondering what had happened to attract such crowds, and finding it rather difficult to refrain from making inquiry from some of the gathering who by this time had hurriedly been retracing their flighty footsteps from the imaginative scene of death. Mrs. Otwell, modestly approaching a female who swiftly hopped over the fence in tears, asked what had happened. "Oh, madam," cried the woman, "the clothing of a gentleman was seen early this morning, as David Gillespie, a laborer, was engaged at a drain hard by. It was neatly folded and deposited on the brink. Surely someone must have been demented and drowned himself in Afton Lake. The authorities are now on the spot and refuse to mention who the gentleman is." Thanking her for kindly informing her of what she had both seen and heard, Mrs. Otwell hurried back to Dunraven Hall in nervous astonishment, and hastily proceeded to her bedroom to prepare herself for what soon must follow. The breakfast being shortly afterwards announced, Mrs. Otwell, pale as death, entered the room, and taking her accustomed seat to partake of it as best she could. She had scarcely got properly seated ere 2 officers of the law were seen approach Dunraven Hall. Ringing furiously, they demanded an interview with the Honourable Eric Eustace. Satisfied as to the name of his present governess, they wished to be allowed to see her, which request was willingly granted. Being told that morning by the gardener at Dunraven Hall, who ran to the spot on hearing the news, that a lady named Mrs. Otwell permanently resided at the Hall as governess, the authorities immediately grasped the fact that she might be the unfortunate widow. And on putting the usual questions to her concerning her husband, they were still further convinced as to her identity. Drawing from his pocket a parcel containing Oscar's card photo and a letter addressed to Mrs. Oscar Otwell, the officer in charge asked her to read it aloud, which she did in a rather trembling voice without betraying such signs of grief as anticipated. The letter ran thus. Dobbs Ferry, Friday night, 11 p.m. Dearest Irene and wife, should ever this reach your length, I trust you will pardon me for the rash act I am about to commit. Since the morning you left me at Shandon Cottage, my sorrow has been greater than my present frame of mind can well support. I therefore have decided on ending my days of starvation by hiding forever beneath the glassy surface of Alton Lake, to shield my wicked body from further inflicting upon you the wrongs I have perpetrated in the past, and for which I am grievously tormented. Dearest Irene, I hope you, in your past great warmth of devotion for me, your poor tutor and husband, will forgive my late ungentlemanly conduct in striking you so cowardly on the eve of my downfall, and thereby breaking the confidence you reposed in me for such a lengthened period of our existence. From what I know of your noble character, I have every faith in your forgiveness, and rest assured, I never mean to face death without imploring you to rectify, if ever in your power, the wrong you accomplished, partly at my request, in breaking the holy cord of union which bound you during your natural existence to Sir John Dunfern, and again uniting it under foul auspices. Had I been so fortunate as to secure you first of all, my conscience certainly would at this moment be both clear and unclouded. But feeling persuaded I have robbed that nobleman who now possibly is pining for separation from a world of shame and sorrow underneath the lordly roof of Dunfern Mansion, I am positively convinced under such dangling dishonor that never more can this world of sin extend to me the comfort I, in vain, have tried to seek. Awake then, my beloved, to whom I attach not the slightest blame, to a sense of feeling and justice, and go, I implore you, and cast yourself at the feet of him, and beg his forgiveness who loved you with a love unspeakable, who severed nearly all his self-indulgence with the instrument of intensity, and hesitated not to lavish it upon the head of her to whom I offer my last advice. Then shall you meet the messenger, death, not with shrinking fear like me, but daring bravely. Of your present position or abode I am totally unaware, but, dearest wife, I trust your race of penury is almost run, and that your latter years may be crowned with Christian fortitude and ease, and freed from the thorny dart of the wicked, in whose grave I must soon lie unwept. Goodbye, forever, from your affectionate Oscar. Mrs. Oscar Otwell, address unknown. Folding the letter and handing it to the officers, together with Oscar's card and photograph, all of which would prove indispensable for their future use, Mrs. Otwell quietly moved again to the breakfast room, and, strange to say, finished her meal in silence. Then, turning to him in whose service she was, intimated her intention to sail for England when the missing body would be recovered, which she meant to bury in Greenwood Cemetery. She lingered on in eager expectation of casting one final look at her husband, but week after week died away without any sign of it being forthcoming, and all hope being fled, Mrs. Otwell resolved to lose no further time in returning to her home of nativity, in order to obey the last instructions from the hand of Oscar Otwell, from whom she was reluctantly obliged to part in the manner described. Another side the picture of futurity presented for the anxious mother, and that was to try and obtain an interview with her son, who at this period must be a boy of some 15 summers. Having everything in readiness for her journey to her native land, Mrs. Otwell left Dunraven Hall amidst torrents of sympathy and warm expressions from every member of the family. And it was when driving past Afton Lake for the last time on her way to the deck of the Delwyn that the crushed widow of Oscar Otwell and legal wife of Sir John Dunfern was made to taste of the unlimited sorrow of her sad career. There she was, a stranger in a foreign land, an outcast to the society she shone so brilliantly amongst during years that were now no more, the fostered orphan, the adopted daughter of heiress nothing, the wife of devotional distinction, the illegal partner of crutchy poverty, and the penniless widow of undeniable woe. She was not even granted the ghostly pleasure of viewing her lover's lifeless body, that would have ended her thoughts relative to him, at least for a time, but as matters stood encircled in doubt, there was nothing left save trouble and anxiety for her whose futurity must ever be shaded. On approaching the harbor of New York, her attention was attracted by a tall gentleman standing not many yards distant, and being so long familiar with his appearance, she found the object of attraction to be no other than Lord Dilworth. Ordering the cabman to a standstill, she popped her head out in utter astonishment and shouted in such a strain as to instantly attract his attention. Alighting with ardent enthusiasm in the very midst of her troubles, she soon found herself in the arms of Lord Dilworth, who appeared utterly dazed. "Protector of powers, can it be Irene? Lady Dunfern, I mean," gasped he in bewilderment, to which she bowed, blinded in tears, and in as few words as possible he related a short narrative concerning both himself and Lady Dilworth, who had long since been dead. On hearing of the death of the once noble mistress of Dilworth Castle, Mrs. Otwell seemed as lifeless as a marble statue, and trying vigorously to regain strength after such a sudden shock, she in a few broken snatches related her plotted career, but misery having likewise carpeted Lord Dilworth's flaws of fate so much of late, he consequently did not seem so astonished as imagined. Leaving Mrs. Otwell so far as his time permitted, he pathetically took his final farewell, and shortly after was busy poring over his books in Franklin Street, office number 715, where he was employed as a clerk at $500 a year. On the other hand, the mighty Ocean Palace was steering firmly against the clashing breakers with unobstructed speed, acting as protector and friend to all those who entrusted themselves to its unsettled shelter.
I feel like this book is bored with itself and trying to finish itself as quickly as possible because, man, the pace has picked up. A lot happened this chapter. And I want to say a huge thank you to all the incredible people whose names you see here who made it all possible. Made this reading possible, not, a man drowning. Particular thanks to Andre D., Banana Fish, Metamorph, Michael Fattori, Wathgwin, and Zanazira. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being you.